minority groups, minority to have this conversation. When we found out she would be part of the NDI-IRI mission, we were really excited. And because if you follow her story, you'd be surprised. A lot of Nigerians follow American politics. So you see why I have lots of fans here. If you follow her story, you know she's a major champion for voting rights. And by Saturday, we'll be going out to the polls to vote. And the beauty about democracy is that democracy is all about freedom. And it's about freedom to participate, freedom to hold the system to be accountable, freedom to make demands, freedom to express ourselves and to enjoy our fundamental rights. And for us in Young Africa, that we believe that there's nothing as so much freedom, because for democracy, it's always about how do we make freedom a bit more accessible to every part of the society. And as we discuss about democracy and discuss around voting rights, we want to say that when it comes to our elections, the elections on Saturday, it means a lot, not just for Nigeria, because this is the 7th general elections. We've had almost 24 years of uninterrupted democratic journey. So it's an election that is important for Nigeria, but it's also an election that is important for the West African sub-region. If you follow the news, you'd hear stories around coups and attempted coup within the sub-region. But it's also an election that is important for Africa and the world, because as the most populous black nation, we need to present ourselves as a beacon of hope for democracy within the region. If we get it right here, if we get it right in Nigeria, we also send a message to the West African sub-region that democracy is here to stay, and we can practice democracy in a way that further develops our continent and further develops our people. But to also inspire citizens in other parts of the world and in other parts of Africa, that if Nigerians can do it, then they can also do it, especially the young people. And I had to bring the youth conversation because we know that these elections ought to be decided by young people. We have almost 40% youth voters, or young people who are registered to vote. That is an important number and an important demography. And if young people turn out to vote, they can influence the outcome of the elections. What we've learned around elections and democracy is that for countries that were able to influence the outcome in a way that would benefit the people, they had to increase turnout. And for these elections, if we can increase turnout, we can influence the outcome of the elections. But as we engage, we must also understand that democracy is about tolerance, it's about inclusion, it's about representation. It's also one of my favorite quotes, that the fact that the majority rule should not become an oppression of the minority. So majority rule should not become an oppression of the minority voices. So as we engage, as we promote and support democratic journey, we also want to learn how other countries have achieved what they've achieved, and then how we can locally or contextualize our own practice of democracy to meet our local context, but most importantly, to empower our people to take agency as they engage in the process. And so this evening, we'll be having conversations around the power of collective action, because at the end of the day, democracy is not about one person or two people, it's about the people. And only the people who are collectively united around the issues they care about can effect the kind of change they want to see. And one of my favorite and one of my beliefs is that democracy is not a product of wishful thinking. For me, democracy is an outcome of deliberate, committed work of a critical mass that can make the difference. And that, for me, is what collective action is. And we're happy to have Stacey here. We'll be listening to her. There'll be lots of questions, because we also want to learn around the kinds of work you did. You know, we followed the elections, and it's interesting to see states that were traditionally red states turn blue, and you're like, okay, how did they politically organize to even get it done? Or how do they get more minority into elective offices? And how do they even get more women into elective offices? And for us, as we move towards the elections, we really pray and hope that we as Nigerians, as young people, we can work together towards collective action, because at the end, power lies when we are more united and when we speak with one voice. So once again, on behalf of our board and management, I welcome you. I want to especially thank NDI and IRI for making this important. Yaga's story is incomplete without NDI IRI, because they were among the first institutions that took a shot at Yaga Africa. We were students. All we had was just big dreams and big vision. we didn't have much capacity, but they believed in our passion and they gave us the opportunity to be who we finally became today. And I want to especially thank NDI, the President, Chris Fumuyo, our uncle. Yes, and yeah, we're really happy to have you here. I wish us a wonderful conversation this evening. Thank you and welcome, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. And I think you've done a great job of setting the foundation and welcoming each and every one of us. I know that we are running behind time a bit, so we do not have enough time for introductions, but we recognize everyone who has taken out time this evening, this very busy evening. We're going to go straight into tonight's conversation on the power of collective action, and I'm going to hand the mic over to Samson, who is going to get straight into the conversation.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, can we give Ibrahim a round of applause? Because Ibrahim and the team put this together in less than 48 hours, and really appreciate and celebrate you guys for making this happen. Thank you very much. Stacey, before I come to you, let's perhaps recognize that we have special friends in the room. We've got the president of NDI, Ambassador Derek Mitchell, who is joined us. Derek, you're welcome. Derek is so special because if you want to clap, please clap. Well, thank you. We started this with Derek 4 years ago, and we're glad that we're able to do this again, and you're in the room. And let me not steal the thunder. Maybe when you come for your remark, you'll say, but I see behind we have Ambassador Johnny Carson seated behind. Hi, please just welcome Ambassador Carson. And we have also members of our board. Did I see Dr. Mark Manu, who walked in at some point? He was a former chairman of the NPP in Ghana and has been doing a lot of work. So welcome. There are a few others in the room, and let me invite Ambassador Carson. I've been asked by the board to invite you to sit in the front, so I have to obey. So please, Ambassador Carson, please. But we've talked about our board, and some of you don't know them, but let me introduce the board chair. Dr. Hussaini Abdul is right here with us. Ezen Wawagu is seated behind Dr. Hussaini. He's also a member of the board. Eze, do you want to? And also we have Bella Ann Ndebisi, who is also a member of the YAGA Africa board. Professor Nnamdi Aduba is behind as well. Welcome, Prof. Dr. Chris Kwaja is always behind, but we also have members of our working group. Dr. Asmau Mekudi is here as well. So Dr. Aisha Abdullahi, I'm sure she will join us. So Stacey.
Yes.
By the way, how many of you know Stacey? How many of you love Stacey? Can you guys scream, Stacey, we love you. That's so poor. Come on, guys. Let's do Stacey, we love you. 1, 2, 3, go.
Stacey, we love you. Thank you. Love you too.
So, Stacey, when we planned this, I know Francis asked, okay, what will be the nature of the conversation? And I said, we're going to let you speak from your heart. And this is something you're very used to. So for the benefit of those who know you but don't know you too well, who is Stacey?
I did not know this was therapy. First, I want to begin by saying thank you so much for having me. This is my first visit to Nigeria, my first visit to the continent, but not my last. And clearly I picked the right place to start.
And someone said you're Nigerian. Eze said you're Nigerian.
I'm not getting into that fight.
You need to add that.
No. I have been claimed by many on the elevator, So I have approximately 7 countries right now, so and I think 14 tribes. So I want to, that is a very difficult question. The business card answer is I'm an attorney by training. I am a writer. I have a production company. I did a documentary, and because I've written several books. I've got a number of books that are under development for TV and film. I am an activist. I am an entrepreneur, which apparently is the national religion of Nigeria. And I am, I think, proudest of being the daughter of 2 of the most extraordinary people I've ever known. My mother and father both grew up in Mississippi during Jim Crow, during segregation. My father was arrested when he was 14, registering black people to vote. We tease him that my mother was across town doing the same work. She just managed not to get caught. But they both grew up with a very vital belief in democracy. And for them, it truly was a matter of life, quality of life, and life or death. My grandfather was conscripted into the army twice. He was sent to fight in the Korean War and in World War II. And each time he went abroad to fight, he came home and did not have the right to attend school, did not have the right to vote. He had the right to die, but not the right to live as a free man. And my grandfather, my mother's father, was born 25 years after the end of slavery. And so when I get the question of who I am the product of those who persisted and those who believed, and I am driven by the responsibility to continue their work. Because if you ask my parents or my grandparents or my great-grandparents, if they were still living, they would tell you that the work is not yet finished, but that the vision remains strong, and that is that we have the right to make our own decisions, we have the right to full lives, we have the right to make mistakes. And I have done my best to try things that I'm not supposed to try, to be in places I'm told not to go, and to do the work that I think needs to be done even if no one else agrees with me.
Wow. So how many of you here share in this story? How many? You've been in places you're told you're not supposed to be? How many? Okay. No, because I want us to also participate in this. So when you talk about persistence, let's start with persistence. And your persistence to continue to run for office. Is it linked to your background and the story you just shared?
When we were growing up, my father said, don't ever tell yourself no, let other people do it. And what he meant was, I grew up in Mississippi, so if you know American politics, American life, I grew up in the Deep South, and I grew up in the state. The state of Mississippi is best known for just how bad it is for black people. We have an entire set of movies about our racism. I love my home state, though. I love Mississippi because it is a place of persistence. It's a place where we have the highest poverty. We have the highest unemployment. We have the highest, you name the pathology or the social issue, and Mississippi is near the top. But we also produce the blues. We produce incredible writers. And what my father was telling us, and my father's the first feminist I ever knew. My dad I have 3 sisters and 2 brothers, and he told us, don't tell yourself no, because other people will tell you what you can't do. Other people will tell you what you cannot have. If you believe it is right, if you believe it is righteous, your responsibility is to try. He did not say lose on national television. And so I've had to go back and re-examine some of his lessons. But that part I take from my mother, which is you may not get victory, but do you get progress? And so I've stood for office 3 times. I was in the state legislature won my first race and then got reelected without opposition. I stood for minority leader, which is the leader of my party. I became the first woman in Georgia history to lead a party and the first black person to lead in the House of Representatives. And then I stood for governor and became the first black woman in America to be the nominee for governor of a state for a major party. So, and I say all of those, I appreciate the applause, but I say that to say that you cannot do those things and then stop because it didn't work. The responsibility is to remember why you tried. Not getting the job doesn't exempt you from trying. Now, there will be a moment, if people tell me no enough, I might start to listen and think, well, maybe they have a point. But I think two tries at an office that no black woman in 246 years has ever attained, it may not be about me. And so I don't know if I'll ever run for governor again. I don't know what I will run for. But each time I've stood for that office, I ran because I believe in the right to health care, and the right to an education, and the right to both safety and justice, that we don't have to debate whether we get one or the other. I believe in fair housing. I believe that if you have made a mistake and have been incarcerated, you have the right to return to community and be redeemed. I believe that these things should be made manifest through who leads our government. And so persistence is a part of that. It is, if I think those things are true, then I should do what I can. And the role of governor is one of those roles that can make it so. But it is not the only one. And so I run for office, but when I don't get what I want, I am not exempted from still needing to do the work. And so I may not get to be governor, but you know, I kind of helped get a president and a couple of U.S. senators. So, yeah.
Well, so thanks for that. So
you're welcome.
Concession means to acknowledge an action is right, true, or proper. That's one of your favorite quotes. Where did that come from?
The speech I gave when I said I wasn't going to be nice. So when I did not win the governor's race in 2018, there was a protracted legal battle. I never once filed a lawsuit to make myself governor. The lawsuits we filed were designed to force the state to count every vote. And I think that's an important distinction that gets lost on Fox News. and those who want to conflate my position with those who try to hijack the system. It was my responsibility as the standard bearer. I told people to show up and vote. I said, if you vote, it matters. I cannot then, fold up my table and go home when I know people's votes were not being counted. And because of the lawsuits we filed in that 10-day period, people got their votes counted. It wasn't enough to make me governor, but it mattered because people who had been silenced were heard. And then I have to give a speech. And in my speech, the tradition had been, and is, that you use the phrase, I concede. But in that moment, for me, the language mattered. I was emblematic of something that was happening in my country that was largely silent. Voter suppression is real, but because it is not as grotesque as it was in the 1950s and 60s, because it did not look as it had before, it had been ignored, or worse, the victims of voter suppression were convinced that they were the perpetrators, that it was their fault. And so my responsibility in that moment was to say, I acknowledge and accept that I did not win this election. I'm not confused. I never once lived in the governor's mansion. No one ever called me governor, in truth. But I was not going to say that the process that removed 1.3 million people from the rolls, that held 50,000 registrations hostage, that shut 214 polling places, that those things were right. And when you say, what I said very clearly in that speech is, I will not use that phrase to validate a system that was broken. And yesterday when I was listening to the peace accords, the language is so profound. It says that you will accept, but you will hold accountable. And we have created this false narrative that acceptance no longer requires accountability. It must require accountability. It must be so that this nation, that my nation, that we who believe in democracy, believe democracy can get better. And if we do not call out its flaws, how can we create its perfection? And you cannot create perfection when you said everything was fine. And so part of my responsibility in that speech and the work I've done both before and since is not to invalidate election. It is to demand better from election. It is to demand better from those responsible for election. But you cannot do that if you become complicit in the system that allowed people to be denied their voices.
Please give her a round of applause. Thanks. No. I think there's lots of words of wisdom being railed out tonight. So I've got two more questions for you before we go to the audience. And it's about the power of collective action, because that's the theme. And your story has been one of collective action. And what are the top 3 lessons you've learned just organizing in the several and numerous organizations and movements you've built? And by the way, there's some Ben here who has, the list of all the organizations you've established, you've created. Yeah.
So the first one is actually from, my parents are now United Methodist ministers. My mom was a librarian, my dad was a dock worker, and when they were 40 years old, they were called into the ministry, so they became United Methodist ministers. We like to tease them that, they preached for a long time, finally somebody paid them for it. But my mother had a phrase that she used that I think is the first and most important. Meet people where they are, not where you want them to be. So often in organizing, we are so righteous in our theory of the case, we are disappointed that others don't believe already. And so we stand here in our righteousness waiting for them to join us. They're not coming. Our job is to meet them where they are and give them a reason to move. Disappointment, despondency, despair, fear, anger, those are things that paralyze you. And if you want to be an effective organizer, you cannot hold that person accountable for what they feel. You have to acknowledge the legitimacy of their feeling and the legitimacy of their pain and meet them where they are, because if you can break that pain, that's when they start to move with you. Organizing is not organizing if you're by yourself. Then it's just talking to yourself. So the first is you meet people where they are, not where you want them to be. The second is that accountability is not an afterthought. It is an action. And that accountability begins with you. When you are organizing, when you are engaging, you have to constantly measure, are you doing what you say you're doing? Are you living those values that you say you espouse? So often we become convinced of our own rightness, and we start to ignore that we're becoming the very people we are mad at. We're becoming the very organizations we disparaged and left. And that's why we created our own. And suddenly we're like, why are we running the very group that we left behind about 5 years ago? And so we have to hold ourselves constantly accountable as organizers, because the validity of our work is grounded in the trust people have in us and our authenticity. And so that means you have to hold yourself accountable. And then the third, and I think it's one of the hardest to do, but it is the most effective, is we have to admit when we are wrong. We are trained as humans, and particularly those who have been oppressed, we are afraid of being wrong because we see it as a weakness. We see it as an opening for someone to assail us. But collective action works best when we can admit we're wrong, because we have the power of those around us to help make us right. You should not be afraid to make mistakes and be wrong when you are working with others, because they can help you be better and be more right. But when you have to be perfect in your decisions and perfect in your outcomes, you are either lying to yourself or someone is lying to you. And when you are organizing, people are looking for you to be wrong. They're looking for a reason not to trust, because trust hurts. Hope is painful. At the very beginning, Brahim asked the question, are you excited about the election? And most of you muttered. Because you don't want to be hopeful. You are here working every day to make Saturday a transformational moment, but you are afraid to hope it works. Because if you put your faith in it and it's not exactly what you expected or what you want, then you've been disappointed, and disappointment is painful. And so we dull down our expectations. But we've got to want more. And I don't believe people are like, are you an optimist or a pessimist? I'm neither. I'm determined. Optimism sounds great, but it's hard to sustain because there are people. Pessimism is easy because there are people. People make mistakes. But being determined removes the outcome from those around you, and it becomes about who you are and what you're willing to do. And part of that is what being willing to be wrong and make mistakes is. I'm determined to get to the right answer, and I'm going to have to stumble through some bad ideas to get there. And when you are organizing, when you are doing it together, then you are also learning together and refining together and getting better together and getting stronger together, and thus you can then win together.
Okay. Yes. So I'll save my last question and then just turn to you, because a lot of people who I know have lots of questions. So we will spend time with you before we come here. So can we pass the mic? Oh, you can have mine.
They're underneath Cynthia's chair.
Okay. Okay. So because there are lots of people who have questions, I'll plead with you that we keep the questions as short as possible. 1 minute? Yes. So just introduce yourself and straight to the question.
Straight to the question. Okay. Thank you. All right. Straight to the question. That's a very difficult.
Yeah, tell me who you are first.
My name is Jude Ferrami. Straight to the question. I've actually watched, learned a lot about you all the way back to the voting rights, and I was like, when I first learned about Stacey Abrams, I was like, oh, nice black woman. But I saw it's not today. It's been years. How have you been able to move from, I don't want to say activism now, but within the civil society into partisan politics, and still be able to hold that power of convincing people, especially with the narrative around partisanship in the US. In Nigeria here, it's the same thing. Yeah, thank you.
No, that's a very. So he's referencing when I was 19, I spoke at the March on Washington. I was the youth speaker. I do not see partisan politics it's a tool, but the mission is justice. The mission is access, and everyone wants it. Everyone wants they want their families to be healthy. They want access to healthcare and housing. They want their children to be educated in good schools. What we argue about is how. And so for me, it's a very easy conversation because the what belongs to everyone. We disagree on the how, but even in the disagreement on how, I work hard to find moments of agreement. So if you remember, do you know what the Tea Party is in America? Okay, so the Tea Party, antithetical to my partisan politics. But as a legislator, I worked with them on environmental legislation. And here's how. I never tried to convince them that they believed what I believe. And so often in organizing, we think the answer is to make people believe. And that's what partisan politics for many people feels like. I'm going to make you abandon your beliefs and adhere to mine. I didn't do that. They don't believe in climate change. They do believe in property value. And what I explained is if this anti-environmental legislation passes, it's going to erode your property and you're going to be paying more for less and less. You don't like that, right? And they're like, no. I said, then you don't have to agree with me, but we can both kill this bill. And we did. And over again, what I try to do is separate my intention from my method. I stand for office when I think that's the best method to implement policy. but I start organizations because sometimes that's the better method. But I never let my mission get compromised by my method. When politicians make politics when that's the goal and not the tool, that's when you have a problem. Politics is a goal. Politics is a tool. Civil society is a tool. Religion is a tool. The goal is to get to heaven, to get things right, to get things done. But I work hard to never...
About whether our politicians actually seek the public interest. And in the US, you're actually worried that they are representing their constituencies because of some of the things that their constituencies want them to ignore or to pursue. So I want to ask you, I mean, your own reflection, what does representation mean for you in a democracy?
I think you're being very generous in saying that self-interest is not also the challenge. Let's think about this, and I say this as a politician. Politics is a game of narcissism. I mean, look, I literally put my name on a ballot saying, pick me and make me better than the other person. Like that, it's an act of narcissism. The question is, how long do you linger there? And we've seen the politicians for whom the narcissism is the goal. It is the end game. My responsibility is to always think about representation, which is different. But the question isn't, do you believe in representation? It's what do you want to represent? There are those in America who very proudly represent the interest of the wealthy and the powerful at the expense of others. In fact, they believe that's their mission statement. And they exist in both parties, although, one party is slightly more, sheepish about it. And so the part of the conversation has to be that you never forget that politics makes people mean and greedy. And in this way, the whole notion of politics is that I'm getting this and thus you can't have it. Because if I get my way, you're not getting your way. If I get this office, you're not getting this office. Now, the greed can be for the right reasons. I want this office to do good, but the fundamental premise isn't different. I just happen to have a righteous outcome in mind. And so our expectations of politicians have to follow that. It is not that they aren't going to be self-interested. It is not that they aren't going to be greedy, but it is where are they turning that greed and what energy are they putting behind delivering for those they say they represent. And it's asking the questions about what representation means. For me, representation means that those without power have access to power and that people have the ability to lead their lives. They can do whatever they want with those lives. They can mess them up if they want to, but they should get to make that choice. That's what representation means to me. And that the artificial impediments of racism, sexism, homophobia, religious animosity, ableism, that all of those things that become artificial impediments to their ability to make choices have to be removed. And so for me, representation is about how do I remove those barriers and ease that path to independence. That's what I think of representation. But let's always remember, every politician and every person working in politics, whether you're putting your name on the ballot or you're behind the ballot, everyone has a sense of greed because we want something. The question is, what is it that we want and why do we want it and what are we willing to do to get it? That should be our measure when we're deciding who we support and when we're pushing people to vote. It's helping them ask that question in a thoughtful way and presenting candidates and opportunities that help make that manifest.
Awesome. Okay. All right.
All right. Good evening. Stacey, so good to have you here. My name is Abosede Jojogan, and I look after an organization called Women in Leadership Advancement Network, WILLAN. So I have a question for you. As a woman of many firsts, what advice do you have for women who aspire to run for office in Nigeria amidst many challenges that I'm sure you've heard about? And then, based on the movements that you've built, what lessons do you think that we can glean to build the women's movement here in Nigeria?
Well, first of all, thank you for the work you do because it's fundamental to my first answer. Do not go alone. Often women, someone asked me what happened in Georgia this year, and there are many reasons, and this is not an excuse, but look, you can't fix racism and sexism in 4 years. It's but you can make dents, and you can make changes, and things can get better. But I acknowledge that the fundamental challenges of gender remain strong, but they are not impenetrable, and they are not irrevocable. And so part of what I try to do is whenever I stand for office, whenever I create an organization, I build in opportunities for other women to be there. My campaign manager was a woman. The organizations I've started, and there's some good men in Georgia, but they all happen to be run by really, really smart women. I make them hire men because I believe in equality, but but what I'm saying is, often when we get to politics, women think they've got to do it alone, or one runs, and we decide, I'm like, fill the ballot. They can't get rid of all of you all at once. But there is power. I mean, there is truth. There is power in numbers, and so the first job is don't run alone. The opportunity for organizations like yours and FemWise and other groups is to organize women to run in mass, and to be there not just when they're standing for office, but when they're being chased off the ballot, when they are trying to raise the money to get the nomination form and the endorsement. It is to be there and to raise the money to help them do it, and then to let them know you'll also be there to provide childcare, that you'll be there when they have to go to 2 different events and they don't have the car. So it's making sure we think through the mechanics of being a candidate. It's hard. I mean, I am a single woman, and I can't tell because of all the pieces that I'm called upon. And so I think part of it is we know when elections are happening in general. So make sure you're planning for that you're recruiting ahead of time, that you're training ahead of time, that you're fundraising ahead of time, and not just for the form and for the campaign, but for the food and for the gas and for the staff. 2, train people not only to run, but to run those campaigns. The best campaigns for women are run by people who understand the challenges that women face. And sometimes those are good men, but more often those are women who face those challenges themselves. And then the last piece is to, when you don't win, do not abandon those women as though the failure is theirs. There is the truism is, success has 1,000 fathers or mothers, but defeat is an orphan. We treat women like that in politics. I didn't win twice. And there are people who I swear they couldn't pick me out of a lineup of one. Now, they when I was talking to Oprah, they can't find me now. And I don't take it personally, but I do take it seriously. And so I made it my responsibility to reach out to every woman who was on that ballot with me and find out what she needs. We cannot abandon women when it doesn't work. We cannot leave them behind when they don't make it as far as we want. And you have the opportunity because of your platform and your voice, but also this is a continent of women. I'm here with President